The late afternoon sun, a benevolent orb of molten gold, cast long, lazy shadows across the manicured lawns of Meadowbrook Estates. It was the kind of day that begged for celebration, a day where the air itself seemed to hum with a gentle, joyful energy. For me, Amelia Vance, it was a day of profound significance. My 40th birthday. And to mark this milestone, I had meticulously planned a small, intimate gathering in my backyard, a haven of overflowing petunias and whispering ornamental grasses, a stark contrast to the meticulously curated perfection that defined most of Meadowbrook. The centerpiece of my planned festivity, the very embodiment of the joy I intended to share, were the balloons. Not just any balloons, mind you. These were a cascade of vibrant hues: sapphire blue, emerald green, ruby red, and sunshine yellow, all shimmering with an iridescent sheen. They were tied with elegant satin ribbons, meant to float jauntily from the sturdy branches of my ancient oak tree, a silent, colorful fanfare against the cerulean sky. They were, in my humble opinion, a touch of whimsical delight. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose eyebrows seemed permanently arched in a state of mild disapproval, had even commented on them the day before. "Quite festive, Amelia," she'd said, her voice a tight, controlled whisper that somehow carried across the perfectly trimmed hedges. I'd beamed, interpreting it as a compliment. Oh, how naive I was. The trouble, as it so often did in Meadowbrook, arrived on the wings of a perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed woman named Brenda Sterling. Brenda wasn't just a resident of Meadowbrook. She was its self-appointed guardian, its self-proclaimed arbiter of taste, and, most importantly, the formidable president of our Homeowners Association. Brenda Sterling was, in the vernacular of polite society, a Karen. And today, Brenda Sterling was about to unleash her unique brand of tyranny upon my birthday. The first hint of discord came not with a bang, but with a discreet, almost apologetic knock on my front door. It was Brenda. She stood on my porch, a vision in a crisp linen suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe chignon. Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, scanned my porch, my lawn, and then, with a pointed intensity, the balloons that were just beginning to sway in the gentle breeze. "Amelia," she began, her voice smooth as polished marble, yet with an underlying current of steel. "I was just taking my afternoon constitutional and happened to notice your decorations." She gestured vaguely towards the balloons with a perfectly manicured hand, her rings glinting in the sunlight. I, still basking in the pre-party glow, offered a bright smile. "Oh, Brenda, aren't they lovely? They're for my birthday party this afternoon. Just a little something to add some cheer." Brenda's lips, a thin, precise line, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Cheer, yes. But Amelia, have you considered the implications?" I blinked. "Implications? They're balloons, Brenda. They're meant to be cheerful." She took a small, measured step closer, her gaze fixated on a particularly vibrant red balloon that bobbed precariously close to the edge of the oak's canopy. "Amelia, Meadowbrook Estates prides itself on its aesthetic cohesion. Our Architectural Review Board has very specific guidelines to maintain the harmonious visual landscape of our community." My smile began to falter. "Architectural guidelines? For balloons?" Brenda nodded, her chin tilting upwards. "Indeed. The guidelines, Amelia, are quite clear. They address, among other things, any external additions that could be perceived as disruptive to the established architectural harmony. These balloons, while perhaps intended with good intentions, are a clear violation." I felt a prickle of disbelief, quickly followed by a surge of indignation. "Disruptive? Brenda, they're colorful balloons. They're tied to a tree. They're not a neon sign or a gargoyle." Brenda's icy gaze finally met mine, and I saw no trace of humor or understanding. The bylaws are the bylaws, Amelia. They are in place to protect the value of our properties and the overall ambiance of Meadowbrook. These inflated orbs, as I shall refer to them, are an affront to the understated elegance we strive for. My jaw dropped. Inflated orbs? Brenda, it's my 40th birthday. I'm not trying to launch a circus. I just wanted a few pretty balloons. Pretty is subjective, Amelia, she stated, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that always made my teeth ache. And in Meadowbrook, pretty is defined by adherence to the established aesthetic principles. These balloons, with their garish colors and their untamed buoyancy, detract from the very essence of Meadowbrook's appeal. They disturb the architectural harmony. The phrase disturbed the architectural harmony hung in the air, absurd and utterly infuriating. It was the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that only a place like Meadowbrook, with its pristine lawns and its suffocatingly polite residents, could conjure. So, I said, my voice dangerously low, you're telling me that my birthday balloons are a violation of HOA bylaws? Brenda gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Precisely. I must ask you to remove them immediately, Amelia. Failure to comply could result in fines. She produced a small, crisp white card from her pocket. This is a formal notice of violation. Please address this matter promptly. She placed the card on my porch railing, a stark white flag of surrender in the face of Brenda's unwavering resolve. Then, with a final dismissive glance at the offending balloons, she turned and glided away, her linen suit rustling like dry leaves. I stood on my porch, the card in my hand, a knot of disbelief and anger tightening in my stomach. My 40th birthday, balloons, architectural harmony. It was all so preposterous, so utterly, outrageously Meadowbrook. This was not how I envisioned my special day unfolding. This was not the gentle, joyful celebration I had planned. This was the beginning of a battle against a woman who saw beauty only in uniformity and joy only in conformity. And I, Amelia Vance, was not about to let Brenda Sterling ruin my birthday. Not today. Not ever. The fight, it seemed, had just begun. Brenda Sterling's words hung in the humid afternoon air, as sharp and unforgiving as the perfectly trimmed emerald green hedges that meticulously lined every property in Meadowbrook. Each shrub, a testament to hours of precise shearing, formed an impenetrable barrier of conformity, a visual mantra of order. A formal notice of violation, she declared, her voice a silken, almost melodic pronouncement, yet with an underlying current of unyielding steel. It resonated with the cold, precise click of a well-oiled lock. Removal within 24 hours, or fines will be levied. The words themselves felt less like spoken language and more like tiny, sharp pebbles being hurled with deliberate force at the carefully constructed sanctuary I had envisioned for my 40th birthday celebration. My jaw, which had dropped somewhere around the phrase architectural harmony, remained slack, an involuntary testament to my stunned disbelief. 24 hours. A mere 24 hours to dismantle the cheerful, iridescent orbs that were supposed to be the vibrant embodiment of my 40th birthday joy. To dismantle a delicate cascade of shimmering hues, sapphire blues, roseate pinks, and emerald greens, that had, mere moments ago, seemed to dance with the cerulean sky, a joyful counterpoint to its vast expanse, not against it. It was not just absurd, it was an affront to the very concept of celebration. It was infuriating, a simmering resentment building in my chest. It was, in a single, perfectly formed word, Brenda. I stared at her, this self-appointed diminutive empress of Meadowbrook's pristine facade. Her silver hair, the color of spun moonlight, was pulled back into a severe, immaculate chignon. a perfect little knot that seemed to mirror the tightly wound precision of her personality. Not a single strand dared to escape its confines. Her crisp linen suit, a shade of pale beige so utterly devoid of character, it screamed suburban conformity. In a hushed yet insistent tone, was utterly unwrinkled, a miracle of tailoring and personal discipline, despite the thick, humid afternoon air that clung to everything else like a damp blanket. Her eyes, the startling, piercing color of glacial ice, held a look of mild, almost imperceptible disapproval, as if my very existence, and especially my rather exuberant choice of celebratory decor, was a personal affront to her meticulously curated perfection. A thin, precise line formed her lips, and I could practically hear the rustle of dog-eared HOA bylaws in the stiff, starched fabric of her suit as she shifted her weight. "Fines," I finally managed, my voice a little higher than I intended, a tremor of disbelief and indignation running through it like a rogue current. "For birthday balloons?" The question felt ludicrous even as it left my lips. Brenda nodded, the movement almost imperceptible, like a queen granting a condescending nod to a particularly bothersome lesser subject. "External additions that detract from the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood are clearly outlined in Section 7B, subsection 3, of the Meadowbrook Estates Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. These inflated orbs, as you so charmingly call them, are perceived as disruptive to the harmonious visual landscape. They are, dare I say." She paused, her glacial eyes narrowing slightly, as if tasting the forbidden word. "Garish." Garish? My balloons were a symphony of shimmering blues, vibrant pinks, and radiant greens, each one catching the sunlight like a captured rainbow, their surfaces reflecting the world in a kaleidoscope of dazzling color. They were whimsical, joyful, a deliberate splash of unadulterated fun against the muted, predictable tones of Meadowbrook. They were a stark, intentional contrast to the relentless, suffocating sameness that Brenda and the HOA she so zealously represented, so fiercely protected. I thought of the meticulously manicured lawns, each blade of grass seemingly aligned with military precision. The identical, understated mailbox designs that stood sentinel at every driveway. The way every shrub, every ornamental tree, seemed to be pruned with the unwavering accuracy of a protractor. That was harmony? Or was it just blandness masquerading as elegance, a beige curtain drawn over any hint of individuality? "They're balloons, Brenda," I said, attempting to inject a note of calm and reason into my voice, though a tight knot of indignation was rapidly tightening in my stomach, threatening to unravel my composure. "They're for my birthday party. They're not a permanent fixture. They're festive." "Festivity, Mrs. Vance," she replied, her tone as smooth as polished marble, yet with that ever-present chilling undercurrent of steel. "Must adhere to the established guidelines. We strive for an understated elegance here in Meadowbrook, a certain gravitas. These brightly colored, untamed buoyant spheres do not align with the architectural vernacular of our community. They are a distraction. A distraction. My birthday. My joy. My simple, heartfelt attempt to inject a little personal flair, a touch of my own effervescent spirit, into a neighborhood that often felt suffocated by its own suffocating perfection. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it all was starting to make my head spin, a dizzying ascent into the absurd. I glanced up at the balloons, bobbing gently in the soft, warm breeze, their iridescent sheen catching the molten gold of the setting sun, turning them into living jewels against the deepening azure. They looked so innocent, so utterly harmless, like children's laughter made visible. How could they possibly be a violation of anything more serious than good taste, a subjective concept Brenda seemed to have cornered the market on? "I don't understand," I said, my voice softening. a desperate plea for reason in the face of her unassailable logic. They're tied to the tree. They're not attached to the house. They're not even particularly large. What exactly are they disrupting, Brenda? Brenda's glacial gaze flickered to the ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching out like welcoming, ancient arms, a stark contrast to the rigid lines of the houses. Then, her eyes returned to the balloons, and I saw it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of something akin to pure disdain. Their very presence, Mrs. Vance, is disruptive. Their untamed buoyancy, their garish colors, their ephemeral nature. They represent a deviation from the established aesthetic. They are an affront to the understated elegance that defines Meadowbrook Estates. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail, tipped with a subtle, neutral polish, against a slim, pristine folder she held clutched in her other hand. This is a formal notice of violation. You have 24 hours to rectify the situation. Failure to comply will result in penalties as per the HOA bylaws. She didn't wait for a response, for any further attempt at reasoned discourse. With a final, almost imperceptible tightening of her thin lips, a subtle tightening that spoke volumes of her disapproval, she turned and glided away, her beige suit rustling like dry, brittle leaves. She moved with a swift, measured step, a stark contrast to my own frozen disbelief, my legs suddenly feeling like lead. She was a formidable force, a perfectly constructed edifice of rules and regulations, and in that moment, I suddenly felt very small, very insignificant, and very outmatched. I watched her go, her figure receding down the immaculate, pristine sidewalk, until she reached the corner and disappeared, leaving behind only the faint, lingering scent of expensive, understated perfume and the echo of her imperious, unappealable pronouncements. The late afternoon sun, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded, continued its benevolent descent, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of molten orange and soft, blushing pink, colors that, ironically, mirrored those of my offending balloons. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. My jaw finally unhinged itself, and I let out a shaky, almost inaudible breath. I looked up at the balloons again. They seemed to wink at me, their vibrant, shimmering surfaces reflecting the golden, fading light. They were no longer just balloons. They were a symbol of my defiance, a small, colorful rebellion against the suffocating, relentless uniformity of Meadowbrook. Brenda Sterling, with her crisp linen suit and her glacial eyes, had tried to crush my birthday joy, to reduce my milestone celebration to a bureaucratic infraction, a mere line item in a ledger of neighborhood conformity. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated the power of a good, old-fashioned birthday party and the lengths to which a woman, on the cusp of a significant birthday, would go to defend her right to celebrate it with a little bit of color, a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of life. A surge of indignation, hot and potent, coursed through me, chasing away the stunned disbelief. Fines, 24 hours? Not on my watch, not on my 40th birthday. This wasn't some garish neon sign or a grotesque gargoyle perched on my roof. These were balloons. Balloons that represented laughter, cake, the popping of champagne corks, and a milestone I had actually been looking forward to. A milestone I intended to embrace with all the joy and vibrancy I could muster. "Oh no, Brenda," I murmured to myself, the words a low, determined whisper that carried a surprising weight of resolve. A slow, knowing smile began to spread across my face, a smile that promised a reckoning. "You don't get to do this." I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was just the beginning. Brenda Sterling had unleashed her unique brand of tyranny, her meticulously crafted weapon of HOA bylaws and whispered judgments, and I, Amelia Vance, was about to unleash my own, a force perhaps less polished, but infinitely more spirited. The bylaws, the architectural harmony, the understated elegance. They were all about to face a formidable and perhaps slightly glitter-infused challenge. The fight, it seemed, had just begun, and it was going to be fought with more than just polite words and veiled disapproval. It was going to be fought with balloons, and maybe, just maybe, a generous sprinkling of glitter. The gauntlet had been thrown, and I was ready to pick it up. The late afternoon sun, once a benevolent orb of molten gold casting long, lazy shadows across my pristine lawn, now felt like an accusatory spotlight. Brenda Sterling, her silver hair pulled back into a severe chignon that seemed to defy gravity, stood on my meticulously manicured walkway, a formidable embodiment of Meadowbrook Estate's suffocatingly polite tyranny. Her linen suit, a shade of beige so bland it could have been a primer for existential dread, rustled like dry leaves as she delivered her ultimatum. 24 hours. 24 hours to dismantle my joyful cascade of vibrant hues, my iridescent orbs of pure, unadulterated celebration. My jaw, I'm sure, had dropped somewhere around the mention of clear violation. I'd spent weeks planning this 40th birthday bash, a gentle rebellion against the beige monotony that had settled over my life like a fine layer of dust. The balloons, a riot of sapphire, emerald, ruby, and amethyst, were intended to be a joyful punctuation mark in the otherwise monotonous sentence of Meadowbrook life. They bobbed jauntily against the cerulean sky, each one a tiny buoyant act of defiance, and Brenda, the self-appointed guardian of our community's aesthetic cohesion, saw them not as a symbol of merriment, but as a blight, an affront to the understated elegance she so fiercely protected. "Architectural harmony," she'd intoned, her voice smooth as polished marble, yet with an underlying current of steel. "These inflated orbs, as you so quaintly put it, Amelia, are a clear departure from the established aesthetic guidelines. They detract from the very essence of Meadowbrook's tranquil, cohesive visual landscape." I blinked, a slow, deliberate movement. Tranquil. Cohesive. Was she talking about the same neighborhood where Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses were rumored to be genetically engineered for maximum pinkness, and Mr. Thompson's lawn gnome collection, though discreetly placed, had recently expanded to include a miniature, albeit impeccably dressed, lederhosen-clad gentleman? Meadowbrook, it seemed, had a peculiar definition of harmony. "Brenda," I began, my voice a little too high, a little too strained. I tried to channel the calm, measured cadence she herself employed when addressing errant sprinkler systems or improperly spaced hedges. "They're birthday balloons for my 40th. It's a celebration. I thought a little cheer would be welcome." Her thin lips, drawn into a precise, unwavering line, did not soften. Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, fixed on me with a pointed intensity that could curdle milk. "Celebrations, Amelia, are to be conducted with a degree of decorum that respects the established covenants of our community. These balloons, with their garish colors and untamed buoyancy, are perceived as disruptive. They are akin to a neon sign or a gargoyle on a craftsman bungalow. A neon sign, a gargoyle. My balloons were gargoyles. I felt a prickle of disbelief, quickly followed by a surge of indignation. I glanced at the offending orbs, still dancing their silent ballet against the sky. They were, admittedly, vibrant. They were undeniably cheerful. But gargoyles? They were the antithesis of Brenda's meticulously curated perfection. They were joy personified, and Brenda Sterling's HOA was clearly not in the business of joy. I don't see how they're disruptive," I countered, my voice gaining a little more strength, a little more of its usual warmth, though tinged with a growing sense of the absurd. They're in my backyard. They're not on the roof. They're not permanent. The bylaws, Amelia, she stated, her tone shifting to one of weary patience, as if explaining basic physics to a toddler, are quite clear on external additions that may be perceived as disruptive to the overall ambiance. While your intentions may have been good, the result is a clear violation. I suggest you remove them promptly. Promptly. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats of fines and formal notices. I could already envision the sterile white envelope, the official letterhead, the precise, legalistic language detailing my transgression. It was the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that made my teeth ache. And if I don't? I heard myself ask, a dangerous edge creeping into my voice. My stomach tightened. This was it. This was the moment I had to decide whether to surrender to the beige tide or plant my flag. Brenda's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that conveyed volumes. Then we will be forced to issue a formal notice of violation, Amelia. And subsequently, fines will be assessed. We aim for compliance, not conflict. Her voice was smooth as polished marble, yet with an underlying current of steel. It was the vernacular of polite society used to unleash her unique brand of tyranny. Conflict. She saw this as conflict. I saw it as a battle for the right to have a little color in my life. A violation? I repeated, the words feeling foreign and preposterous on my tongue. For balloons? For anything that disrupts the aesthetic cohesion, she corrected, her gaze sweeping over my backyard as if surveying a battlefield where rogue petunias had been systematically weeded out. The integrity of Meadowbrook Estates is paramount. We are known for our uniform elegance, our harmonious visual landscape. These inflated orbs introduce an element of discord. Discord. My birthday balloons were discord. I looked at them again, their vibrant colors shimmering in the sunlight. They weren't discord. They were joy. They were laughter. They were the sound of a child's uninhibited glee, a sound that seemed increasingly rare in this meticulously curated community. Brenda took a small, discreet step back, her crisp linen suit rustling like dry leaves. I will expect them gone by this time tomorrow, Amelia. Good day. She turned, her silver hair gleaming, and glided away with the same measured step she'd used to approach my lawn. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her message had been delivered, sharp and precise, leaving behind a knot of disbelief and anger in my stomach. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of the neighborhood pressing in on me. The air itself seemed to hum with disapproval, a subtle, pervasive current of hushed judgment that followed Brenda Sterling like a well-trained shadow. My jaw was tight. My hands were clenched at my sides. 24 hours. My eyes drifted back to the balloons, bobbing gently, blissfully unaware of the storm they had unleashed. They were a splash of pure, unadulterated color against the backdrop of endless beige. They were my birthday. They were my joy. And they were, apparently, a clear violation of the Meadowbrook Estates bylaws. A slow smile, a dangerous, defiant smile, began to spread across my face. Brenda Sterling thought she had won. She thought she had quashed my little rebellion with a few well-chosen words from the HOA rulebook. She envisioned a stark white flag of surrender fluttering over my backyard. But Brenda Sterling didn't know Amelia Vance. She didn't know that a little bit of bureaucratic nonsense, a dash of petty tyranny, only fanned the flames of my resolve. She saw a violation. I saw a battle for the right to have color, to have joy, to have a little untamed buoyancy in a world that seemed determined to keep everything perfectly, suffocatingly in its place. I walked over to the nearest balloon, a shimmering ruby-red orb. I gently tugged on its string. It bobbed playfully, as if taunting Brenda's perfectly controlled world. "You think you're going to take my balloons, Brenda?" I whispered to the empty air, my voice a low growl. "You think a few bylaws are going to stop me?" The balloon seemed to wink, its iridescent sheen catching the sunlight. "Oh, Brenda," I said, my smile widening. "You have no idea what you've just started." The fight, it seemed, had just begun, and I intended to fight it with every vibrant, buoyant, gloriously defiant balloon I could find. Meadowbrook Estates was about to get a whole lot more colorful. My jaw, I'm fairly certain, had dropped somewhere around the phrase architectural harmony. Brenda Sterling, the undisputed doyenne of Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, stood on my porch, radiating an aura of crisp, linen-clad disapproval that could curdle milk at 50 paces. Her silver hair, pulled back into a chignon so severe it looked like it could withstand a hurricane, was a testament to her unwavering commitment to order. And there, bobbing jauntily in the gentle afternoon breeze, was the offending spectacle. A cascade of iridescent orbs in shades of sapphire, emerald, and rose gold. A vibrant, cheerful rebellion against the perfectly manicured monotony of our suburban utopia. "Miss Vance," Brenda began, her voice smooth as polished marble, yet with an underlying current of steel that promised swift and merciless judgment. "While I understand that personal celebrations are, of course, important, the HOA bylaws are quite clear regarding external additions that may detract from the aesthetic cohesion of Meadowbrook Estates. These inflations," she gestured with a perfectly manicured hand, each finger adorned with a glinting, impossibly expensive-looking ring, "represent a clear violation." My mind, still reeling from the sheer audacity of it all, struggled to process her words. Inflations? Detract? These weren't just inanimate objects. They were symbols of joy, of turning 40 and embracing the chaos and color that life had to offer. They were a cheerful defiance against the suffocatingly polite uniformity that Meadowbrook prided itself on, a neighborhood where even the lawn gnomes were subject to strict stylistic guidelines. "Violation?" I echoed, my own voice betraying a slight tremor, a little too high-pitched for my liking. "They're balloons, Brenda, for my birthday. They're meant to be cheerful." Brenda's lips thinned into a precise, impossibly thin line, a gesture that conveyed more disdain than a full paragraph of scolding. "Cheerfulness, Miss Vance, is subjective. Architectural harmony, however, is not. The bylaws specifically state that all external decorations must be in keeping with the established aesthetic of the neighborhood. Think of it. A neon sign or a gargoyle, while perhaps personally pleasing to some, would undoubtedly disrupt the visual landscape. These balloons, while perhaps not as egregious, fall into a similar category of perceived disruption. I blinked, trying to reconcile her pronouncement with reality. A neon sign? A gargoyle? Was she actually comparing my whimsical birthday decorations, a collection of iridescent spheres designed to evoke a sense of playful wonder, to something that would genuinely be an eyesore? My gaze flickered, almost involuntarily, to her immaculate lawn, a perfect emerald carpet that looked as if it were painted on. Then to the identical beige siding of her house, a shade so bland it could induce existential ennui. And finally, to the meticulously curated petunias lining her walkway, each bloom seemingly in perfect formation, as if they'd undergone boot camp. Meadowbrook Estates, where imagination went to die a quiet, beige death. "Brenda," I began, attempting to inject a note of reason into my rapidly fraying nerves. a Herculean task under her withering gaze. These are temporary. They'll be gone tomorrow, and they're in my backyard. No one outside of the immediate vicinity can even see them. Her glacial blue eyes met mine, unwavering, as if she possessed a direct line to the architectural gods themselves. The bylaws do not differentiate between visible and non-visible violations, Miss Vance. Furthermore, the intent of the bylaws is to maintain a consistently pleasing and harmonious environment for all residents. The mere presence of such untamed buoyancy— She paused, as if the words themselves were distasteful, coated in some invisible slime, can be perceived as disruptive. Untamed buoyancy. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so utterly infuriating, that I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a particularly bizarre play unfold on an avant-garde stage. Brenda Sterling, the self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook's aesthetic purity, wielding the HOA bylaws like a medieval knight, wielded a sword, all to combat a few helium-filled spheres of color. It was a scene ripped from a satirical novel, and I was somehow the unwilling protagonist. "So," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone, a deliberate contrast to the frantic fluttering in my chest. "You're saying my birthday balloons are a threat to the very essence of Meadowbrook Estates? That they're undermining the meticulously crafted facade of suburban perfection?" A faint, almost imperceptible nod. In a manner of speaking, yes. They represent a departure from the established visual vernacular. My internal monologue was doing frantic cartwheels. Visual vernacular? It was a neighborhood, not an art gallery. I thought of my mother, who would have found this whole situation hysterically funny, who would have probably suggested adding glitter to the balloons in defiance. And my father, who, practical to a fault, would have told me to just take the balloons down and avoid the hassle. But this wasn't just about balloons anymore. This was about something more fundamental: the right to inject a little bit of personal joy, a splash of vibrant color, into a world that seemed determined to paint everything in muted tones and predictable patterns. "Brenda," I said, stepping forward, my own resolve hardening like concrete, a stark contrast to the airy fragility of the balloons. "My 40th birthday is a significant occasion for me. These balloons are a small, joyful expression of that. They are not a neon sign nor a gargoyle. They are a temporary, harmless addition to my own property. And frankly, I think the only thing truly disrupting the harmony here is this bureaucratic nonsense." Her jaw tightened, a minuscule, almost imperceptible movement that spoke volumes. "Miss Vance, I am not here to debate the merits of your personal aesthetic choices. I am here to inform you of a violation of the HOA bylaws. You have 24 hours to remove these offending decorations. Failure to comply will result in a formal notice of violation and subsequent fines." She produced a crisp, white envelope from the inner pocket of her impeccably tailored linen suit, its starkness a visual affront to the riot of color behind me. "This is your official notification." She held it out to me, a pristine white flag of surrender, a symbol of my supposed defeat. My hand trembled slightly as I took it, the thick paper feeling impossibly official, impossibly heavy, like a decree from on high. But as my fingers closed around it, a different feeling surged through me: indignation, fierce and unyielding. It wasn't the fear of fines or the dread of further conflict, but a primal urge to resist this petty tyranny. 24 hours, I repeated, my voice calm, measured, and, I hoped, conveying a steely resolve that belied the tremor in my hand. "I understand." Brenda gave a curt nod, her eyes scanning my yard one last time, lingering on the cheerful bobbing of the balloons as if they were venomous snakes poised to strike. "Good. I trust you will rectify the situation promptly. Meadowbrook's pristine lawns and harmonious visual landscape are our collective responsibility. With that, she turned, her silver hair remaining perfectly in place, her linen suit rustling like dry leaves in a gentle breeze. She glided away, her retreat as precise and controlled as her pronouncements, leaving me standing on my porch, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the faint, sweet perfume of her disapproval. I watched her go, a knot of disbelief and simmering anger tightening in my stomach. 24 hours? The thought was preposterous, outrageously so. I looked at the balloons, their iridescent surfaces reflecting the cerulean sky, then at the imposing white envelope in my hand. I envisioned a future of HOA meetings, of passive-aggressive notes slipped under my door, of Brenda Sterling's icy disapproval becoming a permanent fixture in my life. But I also envisioned something else, the bright, defiant pop of color against a backdrop of beige conformity. This wasn't just about balloons anymore. This was a battle for the right to be a little bit messy, a little bit colorful, a little bit me, even in a neighborhood that demanded uniformity. My 40th birthday was supposed to be a gentle, joyful celebration, a quiet acknowledgement of another year lived. It seemed, however, it was going to be something much more. And as I stood there, envelope in hand, the cerulean sky above mirroring the vibrant sheen of my balloons, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to surrender. Not without a fight. The balloons, I decided, were staying. At least for a while. Let Brenda Sterling try to enforce her brand of tyranny. I had a feeling this was just the beginning of my rebellion against the beige. The crisp linen suit rustled like dry leaves as Brenda Sterling glided away, leaving behind a knot of disbelief and anger tightening in my stomach. My jaw, which I was fairly certain had been hanging open for a good 30 seconds, snapped shut. The vibrant red balloon, bobbing jauntily just above my head, seemed to mock me with its cheerful buoyancy. Architectural harmony? The phrase echoed in my mind. Absurd and utterly infuriating. It was a phrase that belonged in a dissertation on postmodern urban planning, not in a conversation about my 40th birthday party. I looked at the balloons. A cascade of vibrant hues, sapphire blue, emerald green, sunshine yellow, and that defiant ruby red, tethered to whimsical weights. They were, to my eyes, an embodiment of joy, a splash of unadulterated delight against the perpetually manicured perfection of Meadowbrook Estates. Each inflated orb, with its iridescent sheen catching the afternoon sun, was a tiny beacon of celebration. They were not eyesores. They were, in my humble opinion, a much-needed injection of life into a neighborhood that seemed to have collectively agreed to exist in a muted palette of grays and beiges. Brenda's pronouncement, delivered with the kind of pointed intensity usually reserved for identifying a structural flaw in a load-bearing wall, had effectively doused the festive atmosphere like a fire extinguisher. The air, which had moments before seemed to hum with gentle merriment, now felt thick with unspoken judgment and the oppressive weight of HOA bylaws. My guests, a select group of my dearest friends who understood and appreciated my penchant for color, exchanged bewildered glances. Their smiles, which had been genuine and warm, were now tinged with a shared sense of bewilderment and a growing solidarity with my plight. Did she really just say that? Whispered Sarah, her eyes wide as she gestured subtly towards Brenda's retreating figure. Sarah, bless her heart, was always the first to voice the unspoken. I managed a weak, slightly hysterical laugh. Apparently, Amelia Vance's 40th birthday balloons are a direct affront to the understated elegance of Meadowbrook. Who knew such a simple act of merriment could be so disruptive to the very essence of suburban tranquility. My voice, I noticed, had taken on a slightly shaky, sarcastic edge. Mark, ever the pragmatist, frowned. Architectural harmony. What does that even mean in relation to balloons? Are they going to start citing the neighbor's wind chimes next? Or Mrs. Henderson's flamingo lawn ornament from the 80s? Oh, believe me, Mark, I said, my voice hardening. If Brenda Sterling could find a bylaw to ban Mrs. Henderson's flamingo, she'd have it confiscated before sundown. The thought sent a fresh prickle of indignation through me. It wasn't just about the balloons anymore. It was about the creeping authoritarianism, the relentless pursuit of a sterile, joyless perfection that seemed to be the hallmark of our HOA. Brenda Sterling, the self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook's aesthetic cohesion. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe chignon that looked as though it had been sculpted from granite. Her crisp linen suit was impeccably tailored, a uniform for her self-proclaimed role as the arbiter of good taste. Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, had a way of surveying everything with mild disapproval, as if the mere existence of slightly imperfect landscaping or a flower bed that dared to overflow was a personal insult to her. She moved with a precision that suggested every step had been choreographed, every gesture rehearsed. She was, in short, the embodiment of everything I found stifling about this meticulously curated community. She had appeared, as if summoned by some unspoken signal, just as we were about to cut the cake. I had seen her, a distant figure at first, making her way with a measured step across the impeccably manicured lawn that separated our properties. I'd initially assumed she was coming to wish me a happy birthday, perhaps bearing a plate of her famously bland sugar cookies. I'd even offered a friendly wave, which had been met with a curt nod that felt more like a summons than a greeting. "Good afternoon, Amelia," she had said, her voice smooth as polished marble, yet with an underlying current of steel. She hadn't even glanced at the guests, her gaze immediately snapping to the cluster of balloons tethered to the wrought iron table leg. "Lovely gathering." The compliment, if it could be called that, was delivered with the warmth of a frost warning. "Thank you, Brenda," I'd replied, trying to keep my tone light and welcoming. "Just a little something to mark the big 4-0. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the balloons. "I see you've opted for decorations." The word itself sounded like an accusation. "While I appreciate the festive spirit, Amelia, I must confess these are rather prominent." I'd forced a laugh. "They're just balloons, Brenda." "For my birthday." "Precisely," she'd said, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arching infinitesimally. "And while I understand the sentiment, they do present a bit of a visual disruption. The Architectural Review Board has been quite clear about maintaining the established aesthetic of Meadowbrook Estates." This was where the architectural harmony line had come in, delivered with a perfectly controlled, almost apologetic, yet utterly firm tone. She'd then proceeded to explain, in excruciating detail, the concept of visual cohesion and how external additions that were not in keeping with the HOA's approved color palettes and material guidelines could be perceived as disruptive. The bylaws, she'd stated, were quite explicit on the matter of decorative elements that could detract from the overall ambiance. And then came the kicker, the formal notice of violation, a neatly printed document she'd produced from a sleek leather portfolio. It detailed the offense: unauthorized external decorative inflatables, and the required action: removal of offending items within 24 hours. Failure to comply, she'd added with a finality that chilled me to the bone, would result in a formal warning and subsequent fines. Now, standing in my backyard, the sunlight warming my face, but doing little to dispel the chill Brenda had left behind, I clutched the notice in my hand. It felt flimsy, insignificant. Yet it represented Brenda Sterling's formidable power within the confines of Meadowbrook. The sheer audacity of it all was almost comical. Banning birthday balloons for architectural harmony. It was the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that made you want to scream or laugh, or perhaps both simultaneously.